Good evening, everybody. Hi there, my name's Claire Irvin and I'm Head of Travel at the Telegraph. And I'd like to bid you a really, really lovely welcome for this evening. Lovely to have you all with us on what's a very untravel evening weather-wise, very blustery and wet here. Yes, as tumultuous, I guess, weather-wise, as this year has been for us in the travel industry and for you as holiday makers, thanks to the pandemic. And I think the many things that we will all share are continuously cancelled plans this year, rescheduled holidays, trips, days out. I think the other thing, however, that we all seem to share and what we hear from you on a day-to-day basis is that yours and our passion for travel really remains undimmed, if currently unrealised. And I think what we all share, particularly now, is a real pent-up desire to get back out there safely and confidently. And so in this 45-minute session tonight, we're going to be covering what the latest COVID-19 travel restrictions are. We're going to be looking ahead to the future of what you can expect when we can finally get travelling again, answer many of the questions around those subjects, and then hopefully you'll leave this session feeling you know all you need to know about travelling in 2021. Now, to help me do this, I'm going to be joined by two of my esteemed colleagues. Firstly, Ben Ross, who many of you will know is Deputy Head of Travel. Hi, Ben, are you there? I'm sure Ben's coming. And we will also be joined by, hi, Ben.
Hello.
And we will also be joined by Nick Trend, who is Chief Consumer and Culture Expert at the Telegraph. Hi, Nick.
He's the one with all the books.
But first, I thought it'd be quite fun just to talk a bit about what we've been doing on the Telegraph Travel desk over the past 10 months. To help you, our readers, and indeed ourselves through lockdowns and pandemics. I mean, what a year really. I think in March when everything, or even before that, when everything kicked off, the question we're asking ourselves is, what on earth are we going to do for the next few months? Because it just felt like if there was no travel, what on earth were we going to be writing about? Well, little did we know we would be embarking on one of the, I think we felt it was going to be one of the most challenging, but little did we know how busy it was going to remain and indeed become. I mean, you would agree with that, I guess, Ben and Nick, both of you have been on the front line as well of that in terms of constant change and adapting.
I think the strangest thing professionally, like I guess last March, was suddenly having to think in a completely different environment, a different way about travel. There's never been a point in my travel career where suddenly the world has contracted to such a great degree in such a short space of time. There's obviously, we've had to be very, very adept and nimble throughout all of our careers in travel about making sure we're talking about the right places in the world. If there's an earthquake or a terrorist attack or another unfortunate catastrophe that we've got to deal with and work around. But then suddenly to really watch the horizons that we would normally write about narrow to such an extent so quickly, so rapidly at that beginning point was a real sort of professionally disquieting, but at the same time quite exciting. We had to deal with a really difficult environment, and we had to deal with it as quickly and as sympathetically to our readers as we possibly could. And I think right at the beginning, the basic thing was just to get information out there. We stopped becoming a resource for the sort of inspiration and the consumer focused stuff that we would normally have done straight away, and we got straight into the nitty gritty of, look, this is what is happening. This is what you need to get home. You remember back in March, there was a sudden shuttering, and we had specific writers stuck. One in particular springs to mind in Peru, who we were trying to get home ourselves. And we were having to give all that sort of information to our readers as quickly and as efficiently as possible, while navigating often sort of incoherent advice from the powers that be, conflicting advice from airlines and tour operators, and really trying to get that clarity. And then moving directly from that, I think, to this new world where we were both trying to keep that sort of information surface as much as possible, both in print and online, but also trying to remind people that there was a bit of light and love to look forward to at some point, that we can inspire them, and that we can encourage people to believe that, you know, and I think we're closer than ever to that now with the advent of the vaccinations, that there is going to be a world to return to, and that we can travel as much as we want to, you know, when the time is right.
Yeah, I think it was just a big, I mean, I think we were hugely helped by the fact that we have such amazing online resources, so we could respond very quickly to people and respond to changing events, changing advice, changing government decisions and everything. But it was quite challenging at the time trying to work out, and it still is now, what is the best advice for people. If Ben talks about getting people home in March, but we were also about to depart on our Easter holidays. Should you be asking for a refund? Should you be trying to postpone your departure for a year or 6 months or 3 weeks? And how should you deal with a situation where your tour operator wasn't responding to you? Should you pay a little bit later? Should you pay your holiday balance for your summer holidays? We didn't know until the beginning of July whether we were even going to be able to go on summer holidays. And I think trying to get that advice right was a really big challenge, and it still is. We're constantly being, you know, facing changing situations, new variants, new government protocols. And we really, really do our best. But I think it's important for everyone to remember that we can't be sure about anything now. We just have to give the best advice we can, given the information we have at any one time.
I think the travel situation.
Sorry, that all of you found really useful is the way that we've gone about that, which is with exactly to Nick's point, with those minute-by-minute updates and news bulletins. We've been posting those on the blog. But then also, you know, we've got what I'm sure you all know us for anyway, which are huge, you know, bumper advice pieces, which we've kept updated, and indeed many of which you'll be seeing appearing in those in that chat today. But the combination of both really, you know, I think has been quite challenging for us as a desk. But, you know, I would hope has done that job of keeping you on both those levels really well informed and inspired, of course, Ben, with the 2 weekly sections.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's one thing that we should probably bear in mind as we start this conversation today, I mean, in a way, the travel corridors last year is a big indicator of the fact that advice changes, as Nick says, so quickly, and things move in so fast in the changing atmosphere we're in at the moment. We watched as the Canary Islands went on and off lists. Portugal arrived and left. The Maldives was a beacon for ages as somewhere that you could go for a long time, and then it fell off the corridor list as well. So where we are at the moment is in a
back now though, or it was
in a way we've reached a sort of really interesting point now where in a way the blanket advice is back. You know, we're at a point now where we're all locked down. We all can't travel. We all want to know when the next stage is, and I guess that's the next stage. The thing we want to talk about a little bit today is from this point, which let's all cross our fingers is the worst point we get to. I think we can all really hope it doesn't get any more bleak than this. From this point, almost every travel story, every bit of travel should be about an awakening, an opening, a good news element, something that we can all be excited about, even if it's baby steps, even if it's complicated and there's a step back occasionally. But basically, from now on, as we look forward, we should be thinking about the potential for travel. You know, we're not saying tomorrow, we're not saying the next day, but we definitely now, with the advent of vaccinations, have the potential for travel. And I guess, you know, Nick, for example, will be someone who might be able to give us a little bit of an insight as to when travel will begin to open a little bit more, you know, as we go on. We've all got our halfpenny worth. I'm reckoning late Easter.
Yeah, I mean,
that leads us very neatly into that first question, actually, Ben.
Sorry.
Seamlessly done. So Easter, yeah, I've got my bets on Easter as well. Nick, what are you saying?
Well, I think by that time, if assuming all the vaccinations work and all, by then the vulnerable tiers of society should have been vaccinated. Assuming those vaccines work, we will have had enough time for them to take effect by Easter, and the numbers in hospital and the numbers dying should be really very, very much lower. And I think it's very hard to see how a government could or would want to continue restrictions. I think the challenge we might find, so at Easter, I think we'll be free to travel, assuming all goes well. I think the challenge will be which countries will have us, because we're really doing well on a vaccination point of view. France, for example, which might be an obvious place to think about going to because it's so near. I was going to say because you can drive there, but maybe you don't want to drive there just at the moment with the ports that are in their current state. Possibly the Western Channel ports might be a bit better, but they're far behind us on the vaccination side of things. So I reckon that we can be optimistic and we can think that travel will restart around Easter, but we may have to be patient. The destinations which we really want to go to may not be available to us, and it'll be a while for those to unfold. But I think we can be optimistic. Yeah. I think we can start to lay plans and just maybe not book for May, June yet, but I think we can think about possibly booking for the summer, as long as we protect our money and we book with bonded tour operators and everything. So I'm pretty optimistic about it.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that tour operator point in a moment. First of all, I should just say we're talking about us as in the UK, but I do note from all your comments, we've got some readers from much further afield than that. So big hi to you. And I hope that lots of what we're saying is still relevant, even though obviously we're talking about UK borders primarily at the moment because of being in lockdown. David, I hope you got that glass of wine and you can now see us. But that's a really good point, Nick, because actually if we book with bonded tour operators, why can't we book for May and June? And you know, if we've got that backing there in case something does go awry, do you not think that, or is that just for the bold only?
No, absolutely, you can book for May or June. Absolutely, you can. There's nothing to stop you as long as you're protecting your money. I'm not sure that you will necessarily gain an advantage by booking a few months ahead for May and June, because there's always plenty of availability there. Whereas in July, August, I think things would be very, very busy. So if you want to get a particular holiday in a particular destination, you might well think, okay, I'll grab my opportunity now. And you'll only be paying your deposit now in any case. May, June, there's no problem but you know, what happens if there's a hiccup in the Spanish vaccination program and you can't get to Spain in May, and that's what you've already booked? I just think you might as well give yourself a few more weeks yet before making those commitments, just to allow the situation to become a bit clearer, and then there'll still be plenty of options for you to choose from if you book in March rather than now, for example.
So a bit of a hypothetical question is, somebody asked, although there is guidance against travel currently, is anywhere in the world, if that was to be lifted, is anywhere in the world currently permitting entry for UK travellers without quarantine on arrival? Well, of course, there were a couple of destinations, weren't there, Ben? But or Nick, I don't know who wants to answer this, but as it stood, I think there were 9 countries, weren't there, or destinations that were allowing us in without quarantine, but they still required testing.
Yeah, I think the situation is changing very fast. So the Maldives is one, I think, isn't it? And the Seychelles have just introduced a new policy allowing people who are vaccinated and have a negative test to introduce. But we've shared, hopefully either in the comments panel or we can share it afterwards. We've shared our article, which is kept constantly updated, which includes that latest list. I think the thing is that you don't want to set your bets on it yet, because we can't travel in any case. So you'd want to check it again before, you know, as soon as we know that we're actually going to be able to travel, because there's no point in booking for departures in the next 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, because I don't think we're going to be allowed to leave the country.
I think that's very opposite to Colin Christie's question at the side there. They're booked for the Maldives in early March and the travel corridor is back. So can we still go and have to self-isolate on the way back after a PCR test? The fundamental thing there is at the moment, there's no possibility of travel. None of those questions are relevant until you know that you're able to leave the country in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, there might be the flight, but if the government is advising against it, you will find that you're not insured. That's the key, even if there is still the wherewithal, if the government's saying that. But there's, I mean, talking of the Maldives, so that there is lots of confusion, really, I suppose, around testing. And once we can travel again, about how you go about organising that. And poor Ben and Nick have lived through how you go about getting a test, because I've had several testing dramas myself, and you know, I can tell you that yes, it can be very confusing, but if you just think very carefully and strategically about it before you book, actually it's very straightforward. And once I've done it once, it is relatively straightforward. So the important thing about, I think, the tests that the UK will accept to allow you back into the country, there's very clear epidemiology around what those tests need to be. And if you were to hand those to a private clinic overseas, they'd be able to tell you. And you'd be able to qualify with a PCR test, but equally the quicker antigen and LAMP tests, all of which we have much more detail in the feature. How you go about getting those abroad, if you're with a tour operator, make sure before you go that they're going to help you get those on the way back. Certainly I've been in that situation on a recent trip, and the resort actually sorted it for me. It's very, very simple. In terms of actually arranging your test before you go, most destinations require a private clinic test. So that means anything from your local chemist, a national chemist brand, or a clinic on your high street that offers testing, and they will help you arrange the time and the date of your test according to the destination you're going to, and they will make sure that you therefore get your result before you board the plane. Of course, you know, costs vary massively, so it is going to add to the cost of your holiday. And as we were advising before Christmas, if you're planning to travel over a bank holiday, you need to factor that in as well. So for example, over Christmas, we were saying to people, just be careful if you're planning to travel on Boxing Day, that your clinic will remain open to process your test and give you the results before you go. Nick, we were talking just before we started, weren't we, about Easter? Assuming any of us can go anywhere at Easter, that will certainly be something to think about over 3 bank holidays in 4 days.
Yeah, I mean, Easter, but also perhaps even more likely, if we still need these tests, than the 2 May bank holidays. If you're planning to depart on one of those Monday, May bank holidays, then you getting your result back in time for to travel might be slightly tricky. So I think, as you say, there's a lot of merit in planning ahead, checking with the clinic before you actually book, when you can get the results. And also, it's fine if your resort, on your way back, if your resort can organise your tests, but if that may not be the case in a smaller ski resort, for example, or on a small Greek island. I think it's definitely worth checking before you book that there's somewhere which can deliver you a test. Otherwise, you may not be able to get back home again afterwards.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, of course, all this might change with the vaccine. You know, some destinations will accept vaccinated travellers without a test, but you may need to have a test. Alison's asked this about can they stop us travelling if we have COVID tests? Well, it's all going to be, you know, I think the only answer to that is it's all up in the air at the moment, and it all we're just waiting to find out really after lockdown and as different destinations open up.
This will all blur, won't it, as time goes by and more people are vaccinated, because the emphasis on testing presumably at that point will lessen slightly, and the necessity to have extra tests in resort will also lessen as the months go. No, I'm not talking immediately, but as the months go by. And then that takes us to the idea of vaccination passports and whether we see that as a viable introduction going forward. I mean, there's going to be a point where there are issues of privacy and whether people want to be vaccinated and all that sort of thing. But there is going to be a point where it's probably going to be inherently quite useful to make sure that, just as we used to carry a yellow fever test, yellow fever vaccination notes, that you've got something that says that you've been vaccinated. Like it seems almost impossible that as the months go by, that isn't going to become something that is at least useful to have in your armoury when you're travelling. And, you know, inoculations in the past were something that I basically entitled or enabled us to go to really quite complicated places as Western tourists. You know, there was a point where we could suddenly be vaccinated against hepatitis A and C and typhoid and polio and all the other things that suddenly allow us to go to areas of the world that we perhaps would have been slightly threatened by from a disease point of view beforehand. This is going to be, you know, I think we all have to accept that this is going to be part of the prospect of travelling going forward. You know, hopefully at some point we'll be relying less on test on departure or test on arrival and more on the notion that we have been vaccinated against this awful disease.
Yeah. And Neil, who's asked about the financial implications of that, which I alluded to earlier as well. Neil says rich people can afford to take the risk, most can't. Well, the democratization of those tests is something that we've really been very strong on. You know, we're really pushing for example, those tests are much more expensive in the UK than they are in other places overseas. And, you know, we will continue to push for that. Many tour operators are saying that, and indeed hotels actually are saying that they will help with the cost of testing. So we would hope that that will be something that starts to fold into the cost of travel rather than making it a privilege for those with more money, certainly as we go forward. So if we move through some of these pre-submitted questions then, insurance, that's the other thing, isn't it, that's been completely kept you busy this year, Nick, as always, but also
insurance has been a real nightmare this year, and I think we're in a very poor situation at the moment. I think the travel insurance industry, if it wants to survive as an industry, I actually think needs to come up with a kind of code of conduct for what your standard travel insurance policy will cover in terms of pandemics, because some have basically removed all cover for anything to do with COVID or pandemics in general. Some include medical costs if you catch it. Some will even help if you have to self-isolate before you travel. But there are so many different ways which COVID can affect your trips, and lockdown can affect your trips, changes in the destination, that it's almost impossible, I think, for readers to find the right policy which is going to give them all the cover they want. And I think there's a loss of confidence in the travel insurance industry as a result. So I think we need some changes there. We have got an article which we've actually got Jill Charlton, our expert who writes a piece every Saturday, is covering this subject on Saturday, which we will hopefully get up online tomorrow or on Friday, but it'll be in the section on Saturday, which gives some advice on this. And anyone who wants a link to that article when it goes up, I will happy to we'll get that sent to you. But in the meantime, we do our best to highlight the few policies which do give you some reasonable cover, but I think we need to see a much more coordinated effort by the travel insurance industry to help people understand the problems and what their cover is.
Somebody's asked a question which I'd like to know the answer to as well. Are travel insurers refunding premiums for annual passes for annual policies that they haven't been able to use?
I know that my policy was extended by, I think, 3 months. I was given a free extension, and other policies have done that. I don't think there's been any refunds. I think there have been extensions. I think one of the problems was that, of course, the actual number of weeks we've actually been locked down and unable to leave the country is actually relatively low. What was it, 12 weeks in the spring, and now only 3 or 4 weeks. So it was possible to travel in the summer, so the policy was then live and valid. So I think you're more likely to find you have an extension than you get a refund.
There's a question.
It's always worth asking. So it's always worth asking.
There's a question on the side about EHIC cards, and I think that's probably worth mentioning, especially in light of post-Brexit travel. I mean, certainly if your EHIC card is valid, is still in date, then that is still valid in European countries when you're travelling. But it's obviously a far more limited value than a full travel insurance document. And the EHIC card, when it does eventually phase out, will be replaced by this global HIC, global health insurance certificate, which is being introduced by the UK government, and that will be another, again, a tool in your armory. But I think at this juncture, it does feel, I don't know, Nick probably will argue the point, but I think it's really important that people have the most comprehensive travel insurance they could possibly have this year of all years. It's going to be very important to have that.
I think the key thing is to check that your insurance does cover for medical treatment if you catch COVID. I think it's much harder and there are plenty of policies out there which will do that. It's much harder to find a policy which will cover all the costs of cancellations under all the various different scenarios which may result through lockdown or an outbreak in a lockdown in the country you're going to, as well as the country you're departing from. There are just so many scenarios, and insurers are not willing to take those risks now. But you should be able to get cover for your health if you fall ill while you're traveling. But as Ben says,
I found our feature very useful and took out extra insurance last time I travelled from that. So top tip, read our feature. But yeah, so loss of money, has gone hand in hand with loss of confidence, I guess, this year. So a big catch-all question for you, Ben. What are the best holiday booking and travel options that result in the least loss of money during this pandemic, and as we hopefully, fingers crossed, come out of it?
The crucial thing that everyone has to be bearing in mind is, so we've talked about it so much over the course of this pandemic, is the idea of whether you're going to get refunds, whether you're going to get vouchers, all that sort of stuff. Now, fundamentally, you need to be booking a holiday with an ABTA registered or an ATOL registered company, because that gives you the backup, the sense that you have a higher authority to appeal to, and also they've bonded that. There is money there for you to take. I think it's been very interesting how different companies have dealt with this in different ways. I had two trips with BA booked this year, both of which I had to cancel. Well, both of which were cancelled, very importantly, but neither of which I cancelled, but both of which were cancelled. And I received full cash refunds for those because the flights did not take off. Lots of other operators are offering refunds, refund vouchers, which is another way of them getting away from sending all the cash back to you. And if you feel comfortable about doing that, then that's a perfectly reasonable way of going. But the thing to bear in mind with a cancelled holiday is if the holiday isn't happening and it's a package holiday which contains two elements, a car, a hotel, a flight, then you are entitled to a full refund at that point, provided you haven't gone ahead and tried to put in alternative arrangements beforehand. Going forward, I think the same applies. We desperately need to get the news out there that traveling with a bonded operator is the way to go as things go forward. You want critical mass behind you. You want someone who's there to help if things go wrong. You want someone who's there to refund you if you're unable to travel.
What about if you're traveling with kids with the vaccine or without a vaccine, as it seems? What are we going to do? So short of all airports having creches that you can just drop your kids off in before you go on holiday, which is
that's the dream.
It was discussed this morning, not at home, at conference. But what do we think is going to happen if kids can't get vaccine? Will they have to have tests?
I think we'll see how it evolves.
Will insurers cover school-imposed self-isolation? I mean, it's a minefield for families, isn't it?
I think, as with many of the questions which I'm seeing coming through from people attending this, there is no easy answer. We don't know. Frankly, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to travel with your children before the May half term, if they're school-age children. So we're really looking at the May half term and possibly the summer school holidays. And by then, so many things could have changed that the question may not even be relevant anymore. It's possible we may even have had children vaccinated by then, or that countries which have had all their vulnerable groups vaccinated won't worry about children coming in. That Spain won't worry, Greece won't worry. There are so many imponderables at the situation that I think we just have to be a little bit patient and realistic about what may or may not happen, and just keep an eye on the success, how successful the vaccination program is, whether it's having the effect and how quickly it's being rolled out, because I do think that is the key to allow us to travel. But broadly speaking, most of the Mediterranean destinations will want British families to come on holiday next summer. So they will do everything they can to get us there and to allow us to go in. So hopefully that question about parents being vaccinated but children not won't in the end be an issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm pleased about that.
But could I just add something to Ben's point about this financial security? Because there are two issues. One is there's a risk that your tour operator may go out of business before you travel, and that's what the atoll gives you. But there's also the risk that your holiday may be cancelled and you need a refund. And that's also what ABTA and ATO membership is also important about that, because they have codes of conduct, and that they find it easier to police their members to make sure that refunds are being given. So there are two reasons to be worried about your financial safety: the risk of a company going out of business, and the ease with which you'll get a refund if your holiday is cancelled.
And to respond to Rachel Farrelly's question, that's what we mean by a bonded travel agent. And yes, we would advise against booking flights and hotels separately if you're concerned about getting money back. Because on that basis, the only way you'll get any money back from your flight not taking off could easily be just via a credit card, and that is a more protracted process than working via the bonded organisations.
So back to the dream and destinations and types of holidays. Now, skiing has been so massively hit. We're now in the second season of skiing catastrophe. It's also a very, very it's very close to our readers' hearts. What's going to happen with skiing in this year and onwards?
Skiing has been hugely affected. I mean, it's been very interesting that of all the sort of genre types of travel story that we've been writing over the past year, the one that's been absolutely absent when we've been talking about cruise, we've been talking about activity holidays, has been ski, because in terms of travellers getting in resort, it's always coincided with the points where it's very, very difficult to travel. A little moment just before Christmas when we could have got away to Switzerland, and then we all saw how that ended, and all our British skiers came back with their tails between their legs, unfortunately. We've also had a lot of operators going to the wall in the ski sector, just because they've been unable to fill chalets and unable to fulfill those holidays. Looking forward, in a way, it's been, because we're now close to the end of the ski season as far as British tourists are concerned. It's unlikely anyone's going to be skiing every half term. Although at that point, we discovered when we were talking about it, we discovered that actually there's a huge number of people who've been moved from holidays last year into February half term this year, who are also going to have their holidays moved again. Because it's unlikely anyone's going to be being skiing at February half term. It's possible, I suppose, that a bit of spring skiing is still an outlier that people might be able to manage. At which point, of course, aim high is always the mantra. And then next season, people will I think want to get back onto the mountain. It'll be something that British skiers in particular are desperately keen to get back, and having lost a year. I said my gut feeling is that in terms of destinations, people will be aiming for what they know. I think some of the more esoteric ski resorts that people went to because they knew the others well are not necessarily going to be the places people want to return to. They want to know that they'll get absolute value, that they'll be going to a resort that will be COVID secure, that will have done all the sort of necessary bits of paperwork that require a holiday to go well presented. So I suspect people will be aiming for solid alpine ski resorts next winter. I certainly will be, and I think it's really important that we get British skiers back on the slopes as soon as possible. Apart from ski lifts, it's an incredibly socially distant sport, unless you're going to spend too much time jumping up and down on the tables at parade. I think it has the possibility of being something that we can really see uplift for next season, and I'm mostly just in a sort of fingers crossed stage at the moment.
And that idea of kind of having to the postponement problem of people banking up availability. Is that something that's going to hit cruise as well?
I think it's inevitable that peak seasons attract more and more operators. I think cruise is slightly less because ski's always been very focused around, from a British perspective, around school holidays. So it's always had a sort of cycle of things where there's a huge peak at Christmas, a huge peak at February, a lesser peak at Easter, but still a peak nevertheless. Whereas I don't think that necessarily applies in the same way to cruise, which is less focused around families quite often, less focused around the specific holiday seasons. I mean, we know, for example, that cruises, have always been immensely popular with our readers, and I think it is something that people will want to be getting back to. Cruise became the poster child of coronavirus right at the beginning of all the things that went wrong with it, and it was a really difficult time for cruise operators. But you sort of think that when vaccinations come back, when people are feeling more secure about it, that cruises in particular will become really quite COVID secure environments. It's very likely, I think, and again, we don't know this yet, but it's very likely that cruise operators are the sorts of operators who are going to say, you must be vaccinated to be on our cruise. And once you're on that cruise, you've been vaccinated, you've had your negative PCR test before you get on there, you're basically in a very useful, at this point, bubble. And they've been spending so much effort, so much money, so much time to make sure that all the socially distancing tools are there in terms of contactless credit, in terms of doors that unlock at the wave of a magic wand. All these things are terribly important, and not the magic wand bit. All these things are terribly important in terms of making sure that people feel secure on board cruise. And what I think, from a Telegraph Travel perspective, we know our readers love cruising. We're really excited about the prospect later in the year of people being able, particularly, let's say, doing X from the UK, so taking a cruise that leaves and returns to a port in the UK. That could be a really good, really safe, really secure way of going on a holiday later this year.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. There's been lots of questions I've noticed in chat about vaccine passports. This is something we are covering a lot, and you'll find a lot of our news pieces. We've run some analysis and news updates on vaccine passports. Effectively, at the moment, nothing's set in stone with vaccine passports, and much of the travel industry is broadly supporting these as a way of getting travel up and running. We're sort of cautiously supporting that because, of course, what we don't want is a situation where people without them are discriminated against. So we're thinking that perhaps what might happen is, if vaccine passports are introduced on an international basis, and that's, of course, reliant on bilateral agreements, which could get very complicated, that they would come hand in hand with testing regimes for those who don't have them. But as I say, that's another of those stories we're just going to need to keep an eye on. But how about there's been lots of questions about specific destinations, both on our pre-submitted questions and our questions this afternoon. So Nick and Ben, what are we saying? Are we saying, lots of people are saying, is long haul going to be possible by the end of the year? Certainly long haul has actually proved in some ways easier than Europe in recent weeks and months. What are we saying is the best bet for 2021? Are we going Europe? Are we going long haul?
My gut feeling is that we'll start to travel like we did in the past. You spread your wings with holidays in Britain. You go a little bit further and we get excited about being in Europe again, and then we'll perhaps move into the long haul territory a little bit more. In terms of the things that people really get engaged with and want to do, I think people will start in the UK, move on to Europe, go long haul after that in terms of an order of things. And we've got to bear in mind that, especially with long haul, it's going to be about whether the countries want us to come. They will be dealing with their own issues with the pandemic. It could well be that UK travellers are the most vaccinated, are the people that feel as though they're entitled to travel the world because they've got this new superpower. But there will be points where specific countries still want you to do isolation, still want you to do tests. It may well be that they just say, look, we're not opening our borders. These are going to be real concerns over the coming months and months. But you sort of get the impression that the first thing that will be up and moving will be Europe.
Yeah,
I think there's been I was just going to say, there's been, in some of the pre-submitted questions and also some of the questions which have been coming through today, there's been a lot of interest in when Australia and New Zealand might reopen. I think the Australian Health Minister yesterday said he didn't think that it was likely that Australia would reopen to overseas tourists this year. Someone asked about Christmas. I guess it's conceivable that things might be sorted by Christmas, but I think both Australia and New Zealand are not really realistic prospects until the tail end of 2021. And also, if you look at the traveling calendar, the long haul season tends to be more in winter time. So I think, to back up Ben's analysis, it's more likely that it's less likely they'll want to be traveling long haul during the summer months, and more likely that they'll want to be going to Europe. So I think it is, long haul travel is something which will take longer to roll out, but there may well be some destinations, I don't know, like Mauritius or the Seychelles or the Maldives or the Caribbean. The Caribbean in April is lovely. Which
there's a sort of sense of security of going somewhere, where if it's somewhere that they know that they can get practical advice about while they're in destination, they'll probably be more relaxed about doing it. And I think that would include the Caribbean. You sort of, lots of our readers get the Caribbean and they understand what they're going to experience when they're there, so they may feel more prone to wanting to travel.
And a big open question as well is the US.
Yeah, that was for our friends here, and this afternoon. What about the US? I mean, big change obviously today. Earlier this week we had 3 minutes of thinking that the restrictions might be lifted. Yeah. What are we saying?
Well, I think it's been a quiet few months for us in terms of writing about the US. It's been so complicated with the pandemic story that's been unfolding there, and also the political situation. I mean, I'm looking forward to running, some quite big stories on the US coming up, and I think it will be somewhere that people really want to re-engage with now. I think, just as with any other destination, we'll be waiting for them to say yes, it's time. So I think realistically, the US is unlikely to be somewhere that we'll be flying to before summer. I don't know if Nick...
It's easy to forget quite what a serious time they're having with COVID over there. And I think it's a very self-contained, it's a huge country, obviously, it's very self-contained. It doesn't really need to open its borders before it feels comfortable with it. I don't know what overseas tourism contributes to the US, but I don't think we're very high on their priority list. But on the other hand, there are lots of cultural connections. So, maybe by the summer we will be traveling to New England or Florida next autumn. But it's an open question. I think it depends very much on how quickly Biden managed to get on top of the vaccination program there.
Unfortunately, at that point, we've just got about 30 seconds left for me to wrap up. I'd just like to say a huge thanks, Ben and Nick, for joining us this evening, and thanks to all of you in the audience. It's just such a thrill to have you all with us, to know you're out there, and to if you've taken the time to join us. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you, and hopefully see you next time.
Thanks very much.